So, welcome everybody to Chris's presentation entitled Life Needs Balance is the New Black. Sounds interesting. Chris is the Wellbeing Specialist for Phoenix Support for Educators. Chris has a keen interest in health and well-being, and his passion for hypnotherapy and mindfulness turned professional after his appearance on Australia's most popular national morning television show, Sunrise. It is Chris's goal to increase well-being practices in the early education setting, and he's excited to be developing programs that do just that. So Chris, sounds magnificent. I can't wait. But before we go into the presentation, I just need to let you know about a few things. All of you have entered as muted, so the background noise doesn't affect Chris's presentation. If you're having difficulty with connectivity, it might be helpful to switch your video off, but we all want to see your beautiful faces, so please leave it on. Please note that the session is being recorded, and when you participate using audio, video, or the chat features, these contributions will be captured. When the presenter is not sharing their screen, you can move from gallery view to speaker view and vice versa, and that's on one of the buttons up the top. You can pose questions in the chat box or use the reaction buttons to interact with the presentation, and both of these buttons can be seen in the bottom of the Zoom screen. And Chris has asked for questions to be posed in the chat box. Chris hopes to be able to answer your questions as he goes along, but if he doesn't, he will address them when he can. So over to you, Chris.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me here. So I know last year I got to present in person, and this is going to be my first actual presentation since January. So that was the last keynote I did was in January. So I might even be a little bit rusty. If I start talking about something that's not even what's going on the screen, you know why, because I've just gone off on a tangent on something else. So, so hopefully I'll try to stick to the same timeline as well, but I could get used to this as well. I'm in my tracky pants, I'm in my slippers, so I'm getting quite comfortable doing things this way. So I might even take them on tour with me when we can open up borders again. So this workshop is called Life Needs Balance is the New Black. I wish I could take ownership of that name, but my wife Sandy is a lot more cleverer than I am, and she came up with that one. She's actually giving a presentation at the exact same time downstairs, so I'm much more, I'm way more exciting than her, so don't worry about going to listen to her. Okay, let's begin, shall we? Oops. Okay, I might have to click it through this way. So how many people here were there last year? Did anybody see my presentation that I did last year on Educator Wellbeing? There might have been a few. I might just move this aside. No, okay. I've come to your service. Yes, great. So what I'm going to do, for those of you who have seen me before, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap. This is so because some of this stuff is fresh, so it's fresh for you again, and also so it leads on to the next stuff, and also for those who haven't seen this before. So I'm going to cover a few things again. Those of you who have seen me in person, I usually do some magic tricks and mind reading tricks and even hypnosis demonstrations, which lead on to those, the learnings that we're talking about. So obviously it's not going to be as exciting if I go ta-da here over a webcam. So I'll just explain to you what happens, and I've got a recording that we can, talk a little bit about. So let's get started. Before we begin, I want to start with this quote from one of my favorite philosophers, Epictetus. Now, Epictetus was a Roman slave. He lived around 2,000 years ago, and he later on became a philosopher when he became a free man. But one of the things that he says, which I think is incredibly important to always remember, that it's impossible for a person to begin to learn what they think they already know. So for the rest of today, for the rest of your life, if possible, but definitely for the rest of today, let's think from a different place. Let's think from a place of openness, a place of possibility, a place of perhaps, a place of maybe. Let's just be open to these ideas today, and we'll go from there. So I mentioned at the start that I do hypnosis. I'm a hypnotist and I use hypnotic demonstrations. Has anyone here experienced hypnosis before? Have they done hypnotherapy, or even in the comedy sense of hypnosis before? Has anyone experienced that? So I might just move my screen so I can see everybody. Yes, I did it to you, did I, honey? Ah, great. Fantastic. I'll just open that up so I can see everybody. Great. Okay, I've got another question then. Who here has driven along and just completely zoned out and just lost 5 minutes. You're just driving along, you turn up in your driveway and you go, wow, I don't even remember that trip, or I don't remember parts of that trip. How did I get to this part? Or you go through you go through a traffic lights and you go, wow, was that even green just now? And you realize that you've just zoned out, right? That's when you slip into autopilot. We call this highway hypnosis. Essentially, your subconscious has got ahead of your conscious mind and you've just been driving on autopilot. We do this because, do you remember when you first learned to drive, you had to think about absolutely everything you do. You had to think about indicating and changing gears and all that sort of stuff. And it was quite difficult. So anything that we're doing over and over and over again gets stored in our autopilot to make life easier for us. It's there to help us. So we don't have to concentrate on absolutely everything we do all the time. Because our conscious mind, what we can actually pay attention to is actually quite limited. We can move our attention quickly between things, but there's only around 8 or 9 things that you can actually fully give your attention to at any one moment. Probably even less for us guys, but we won't go there. I don't have any guys to defend me here. So anything that we do over and over and over gets stored in our autopilot to make life easier for you. It's there to help us. So it's generally a pretty good thing. So it's made of past predictions, past events for future predictions. Anything you're doing just over and over, it just becomes an autopilot response. So generally it's pretty good. The problem is, however, sometimes we can get old habits stuck in our autopilot, which aren't as useful to us anymore. Like growing up, my mum used to say there's starving children in the world, finish everything on your plate. I don't know if anyone else has heard that same thing before. So even today, I could be full half an hour ago, but if I'm not paying attention, I keep eating until my plate's clear. And then if no one else is around, I get that urge to eat off my kids' plates as well, trying to clear those plates so I don't waste any food because it's an autopilot response. So there's so much stuff that we do on autopilot, including the way we think about things. Sometimes when something happens, we slip into autopilot thoughts. We start to react to situations instead of responding to situations. So when you respond to a situation, you start to pay that conscious awareness of it. But when you react to situations, you're just sort of going straight into it. Some say we even just move from one autopilot to another. Who's got a friend that as soon as you see that friend, you're automatically in a good mood? They don't have to say a word, but you see them and you just go, oh, you just feel great inside. Just the moment you see them, you have this association with them. And then conversely, you might have that other person, someone you love, maybe your sister or someone, you see them and you love them, but then they take that little bit more energy from you. You're like, oh, great, here's my sister again. Or even the workplace sometimes. You know it's not actually the workplace, but you turn up sometimes, you can feel a little bit more drained because you're starting to associate it with taking that bit of energy from you, right? And I know this happens to nobody here, but you know what happens on a Monday morning when people go, oh, Mondays, right? Yeah, that's an autopilot response. You know, what's the difference between Monday and any other day, really? We just have this autopilot response to it. What we need in these moments is what's called a pattern interrupt. If we want to break an autopilot, we need that shake-up moment. A good way I like to think of a pattern interrupt is who's ever eaten a bag of chips or something, you're eating away, and then you hit the bottom of the bag and you're just like, oh my God, I just ate an entire bag of chips or whatever it was you're just surprised that the whole thing's disappeared. That's a pattern interrupt moment. So if you want to break a habit, what you first need is that pattern interrupt moment, that jarring moment that makes you aware of the autopilot you're in, and then you need to change that autopilot. So you know how I said if you drive to work, you might zone out. If you drive to work, if you purposefully drive to work in a different way now, you won't slip into that autopilot as much because you're already breaking up that pattern. Now, something else about that subconscious mind, that part of us, is that it's always listening. It's paying attention to everything that's going on. We think that our conscious mind, the things that we're consciously paying attention to are the biggest parts, but our subconscious is taking on so much more information, stuff that we're not even aware of most of the time. Who's heard of something called the cocktail effect? The cocktail effect is where, if say, it comes from the whole idea, if say you're in a loud environment all of a sudden, and you can just be talking to your friends, not even paying attention to what's going on, but you could hear your name called out from across the room. So there's that part of you that's still tuning in. So there's a part of us that's always continuously listening to what's going on around us. One final thing about the subconscious. So I'm trying to work out where I can store everything to click without getting in the way. Now, one final thing about the subconscious is it doesn't know the difference between pretend and reality. Who's watched a scary movie and your heart has beat faster? Yeah. You know, it's just a movie, you're perfectly safe, it's behind a screen, but there's a part of you that thinks there's a real threat going on. So it's igniting your fight or flight response. So the same thing can happen with other emotions as well. You can listen to your favorite sad music, feel a certain way. You can watch commercials of your favorite food and start to feel hungry. So therefore, just the way you think about something can have a physiological effect on your body. Now, what I usually do now, if we're in a live session, which is, if you can see that photo down the bottom corner, that was ECTA last year, where we were doing some hypnosis demonstrations, showing this mind-body connection. And just the way you think about something can have a physiological effect on your body. So what I'm going to do now is just show you a quick clip of one of those things that I usually do on stage, showing how people are getting stuck to the ground just by the way they think about it. And then I'll open that up a little bit to discuss that demonstration. So let's have a quick look at this.
Try and take a step and find you can't. One of them you try, it just sticks that you've got involved. Really, really sticks. Really try. And it's funny again. Alright. Alright guys, I'm gonna get your attention for a moment. Guess what? Can I really dig into the ground? Is it possible that I could really stick that in the ground? At the end of the day, I'm a person playing a hypnotist. There is no such thing as a real hypnotist. I couldn't really stick you to the ground. It's your own thoughts that have you stuck in this moment. The way you're thinking about it has you stuck with it. So thinking on that now, knowing that you've just stuck yourself, take a step now and find that. Big round of applause. Try and take a step and find.
So what I usually do at that point is I put the sign up behind them that they can't see it. They're saying that we can be stuck by our own thoughts alone, right? Now that's always a little bit of a silly demonstration, gets everybody laughing and sort of the wow moments and stuff like that. But the point I want to make is, you know, that's a bit of a silly demonstration. You're not going to walk down the street and get stuck on the ground. But how many different ways are we stuck in different problems just by the way we think about those problems? We think about them and they get so big and they catastrophize and all of a sudden they become our whole world and we get stuck just by the way we think about these different little things, right? So the point I want to make with that whole little section is if our subconscious mind, if there's a part of us that's always listening, so it's always listening to all that little self-talk that we're telling ourselves, all those stories, those personal little narratives, and if it doesn't know the difference between pretend and reality, so it's not running it through a filter saying, actually, is this stuff I'm telling myself, is it true or not? And then if it becomes our autopilot, what are the stories that we're telling ourselves? Because all we are these different stories, these different little personal narratives that we tell ourselves, like I'm this kind of person, or I'm that kind of person, or I'm no good at this, and no one loves me. And, you know, we just fall into these stories and we make our stories our whole world, right? Because you know, when you watch a movie and it says, based on a true story, you have a certain level of skepticism. You go, yeah, this is generally what happened, but it says based on a true story. So you know that they've, you know, no one was there to hear that conversation between those people. So surely they made that part up, and we have certain levels of skepticism. What we don't do, however, is apply that same level of skepticism to the most important stories, which are the stories that we tell ourselves every day. We seem to take on those stories as if they're absolutely true. You are allowed to challenge your thoughts. Just because you think something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You are allowed to challenge the thoughts that you're having. And if you're allowed to challenge your thoughts, that means you're allowed to change your story anytime you want. We write the scripts to our lives. So you can't always control the situation. You can't always control what's going on around you. But with practice, you can learn to control how you respond to those situations, whether it be in just the way you think about those situations. Therefore, the stories we tell ourselves come from the way that we think about things. And then the way we think about things affects the way that we feel about things. And then the way we feel about things affects the way we behave. So that's classical sort of CBT stuff, which we'll go into we'll play with a little bit later. But essentially the way we think about things affects the way we feel about things, which then affects the way we behave. So what we've got to constantly ask ourselves are, how helpful are the thoughts I'm having? So this is a little bit different to optimistic versus pessimistic type thinking. It's more, is my thinking, is it helpful or is it unhelpful right now? So there's this huge list of unhelpful thinking styles. If you just Google unhelpful thinking styles, there's this great list of them. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to go through a couple of situations where we can see how the unhelpful thinking affects the situation itself. And then we'll get into the whole life needs balance things and how this all sort of ties in. Okay. Overgeneralizing. This is where we take one instance or one thing that occurs, and then we just oppose it on everything that happens in the future. So we have one example and we just say, all right, this is always the way things are. So for instance, nothing good ever happens to me. Personalization. This is where we blame ourselves for things that aren't exactly our fault. We just feel like it's us or it has to do with us when it's not necessarily, we aren't involved in it. And the opposite to that is when we don't take ownership over things. Another one is emotional reasoning. When we just feel something must be true, even though we have no proof to do it, we just feel this thing is wrong or right, which is sometimes there's this thing called intuition and then there's emotional reasoning. So sometimes you've got to really balance up between the two, because I've seen a post before where it said, it was on Facebook and it said, trust your intuition 100%, which sometimes can be dangerous because what is intuition sometimes and what is emotional reasoning? Just because you feel a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Catastrophizing. This is where we blow things out of proportion. We've all done those catastrophizing moments, right? We've all done those. Or disqualifying the positives, where good things happen, but we just choose to ignore those good things. We just say, oh, that doesn't matter, or that didn't count. And we only seem to focus on the other things that are negative. Or black and white thinking. This involves only seeing one extreme or the other, the and or type arguments, ignoring that there's actually often a gray area in almost every situation. Oscar Wilde, he's one of my favorite writers, but he says, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. And I think that's fantastic. Or jumping to conclusions, how many of us do the jumping to conclusions, what if this happens? What if that happens? We start to play the what if game, and then, we're just predicting 10 steps down the line, and often half of those, they never end up usually occurring most of the time. So that's when we assume something about the future. Labeling, when we assign labels to ourselves and things like that, when we say, there's something wrong with me and we call ourselves these certain things. Shoulds or musts, this is where we tie ourselves into situations. I'll give you all a list too. If anyone wants to email me afterwards as well, I know I'm going through this pretty fast in terms of timing. But yeah, shoulds and musts. Mental filter, this is when we only pay attention to certain bits of information, ignoring the other bits of information that are equally important. So let's see a few of these now unhelpful thinking styles in different situations. So I've got a friend, John, he works in construction, and my friend, even though he works in construction, so he's a builder, so he's constantly creating change around him, he can't stand change. He cannot stand change at all. Again, I don't work with him. I wasn't built for that kind of manual labor. Let's just say I'd prefer to stand on a stage or sit behind a computer screen. But my friend doesn't like change at all. So what I tell my friend is change is inevitable. In your personal life or your professional life, there will always eventually be change. Sometimes that change is small, or sometimes that change is huge, like what we're experiencing right now. And usually because sometimes we go through a long period of time where we don't experience change, we sort of forget that. But eventually change will always come. So what I tell my friend is change is inevitable. You can either dig your heels in and forcibly be dragged along with change, constantly in disharmony, or you can learn to go with the flow. You can control the things you can and accept those things that are outside of your control, right? Now, this is one of the statements he usually says. I've cleaned it up a little bit to take the F-bomb out of every second word that he usually uses. But his are, there are too many changes at work. So if we look at these unhelpful thinkings, what are some of the unhelpful thinking that we could see in my friend on his ideas of change? Just feel free to either call out loud or put in the chat box. There's not too many, so it's not gonna, I don't think it'll overwhelm.
Overgeneralizing.
Black and white thinking.
Yeah. Overgeneralizing. There's always black and white thinking, all change or no change whatsoever. Yeah. Any other ones? Sorry, John, I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
Shoulds and musts.
Shoulds and musts. Yeah. Here's just a couple I've put on. But again, mental filter, he's only paying attention to the things that are changed, ignoring the things that have stayed the same. More than likely, his job's probably exactly the same. He's just paying attention to the parts that are, that have changed. What happens is when you do that, all of a sudden you're just paying attention to that, and those parts start to get bigger, and it's like a magnifying glass on the parts that you don't like. He's disqualifying the positive. Half of those changes are probably there to make his job a whole lot easier, but he's just choosing to see the negative parts in it. Catastrophizing. There's all these changes happening in my work. I could talk to one of his other workmates who might just say, oh, there's a couple of changes here and there. But in his mind, there's just all these changes. Jumping to conclusions that they're all going to be negative, or there's just going to be all these other, there's just all those, you can almost make all those unhelpful thinking styles come into that situation. And it shows that it's not actually the situation itself, it's his thoughts around change. Because if it was change itself, it would make us all feel the same equally all of the time. But it's just using those different unhelpful thinking styles affects the way that we feel about those changes. Most often too, fear of change is actually just fear of the unknown, because we don't know what's going to happen next. But I'll give you one of my own to show that I'm not just picking on my friend. Before doing all this stuff with workplace wellbeing and whatnot, I actually used to be a town planner. That was my previous role before doing this. So I grew up on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. So what me and my sister did, we said, we're going to grow up and we're going to get educated and we're going to move away. We're going to transcend our economic backgrounds, right? So my sister went on to become a nurse and I went on to become a town planner. So my job in town planning was originally in councils to approve developments. People would bring things to me and say, I want to build this. And I'd say, yes, no, change this, whatever. That was my job. I did that for a number of years until I worked into the private sector. And then I worked my way up until I was managing big developments where you'd take them in and say, although this doesn't comply with the planning scheme, I still think it should be approved because of X, Y, and Z. You make your arguments. Now, if developments are really big, they go to these things called consent authority meetings. That's where it's too big for council to sort of approve. So you got to get this whole board of people to approve your development to say it's okay. Now, because I grew up on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, I developed this thing called imposter syndrome, where I felt like I was a fraud. And I thought, well, at any moment they're going to find out I'm a fraud and I'm actually not meant to be here right now, right? They're going to find this out. And so I'd be at these meetings, I'd be completely panicking on the inside, even though I'd been doing this job by 10 years by now and earned my way right up to managing this company. But this is one of the statements I used to say to myself. What if I make a huge mistake? What if they find out I'm a fraud and I'm not actually meant to be here? So what unhelpful thinking styles can you see in me?
Disqualifying the positive.
Yep, that I earned my way to get to that position.
Yep, jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, that I was going to
Labeling.
Labeling, yeah, calling myself a fraud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional reasoning.
I'd say even emotional reasoning.
Yeah, emotional reasoning. Just because I felt this thing was true, I thought that I was, but there was nothing to back that up. It was just the way I was feeling about that situation, right?
You'll feel that way too, by the way. Not about you, but like the imposter. just saying.
Yeah. Labeling myself. Yeah, absolutely. I can see that in the thing. Yeah, I'll put a couple there. Yep, labeling, catastrophizing. What if I make this huge mistake? And been doing the job for 10 years. I've never seen anything like that ever happen in my life. Labeling, calling myself a fraud, disqualifying the positive that I've got myself there. Earned my way to that position. Emotional reasoning, personalization. Every time I was going to one of those meetings, it's actually about the project and not me anyway, but you sort of bring it back to yourself, jumping to conclusions that this thing's going to go terribly and whatnot. And who here hasn't experienced any of these unhelpful thinking, right? We all have. Who was almost looking through that list when I was going through and going, oh yeah, I do that one. That's my mother-in-law. Yeah. We all do it, don't we? Which is the point I want to make is everyone has unhelpful thinking. I have them, you have them, we all have them. And in a strange kind of way, it's a little bit comforting that we all have them. Because if we all have them, it actually means there's not actually anything wrong with us. What we just got to learn to do is not empower them as much, because they don't exactly go away, but the less empowerment we can give over them, the less they're going to have an effect on our lives. So that's what's important to know. They're just thoughts. They're not who you are. The fact that they can be named means that they're not you. It's just a shared thing that we all have. Who's seen the work of Dr. Russ Harris before? The Happiness Trap. I've got his book. Oh, you have? It's an absolutely amazing book. I should get shares in this book. I reckon I've sold it to that many places around the world now. But he's got a great scenario about, he doesn't use unhelpful thoughts, but he makes a scenario using anxiety and things like that. But if we can refer to these unhelpful thoughts, if we imagine that we're on a bus and there's bullies on the bus, and all those bullies are just our unhelpful thoughts, the more that we engage with those unhelpful thoughts, the more they're going to rile us up. But if we ignore them and go, they're just the bullies on the bus, they're just my unhelpful thoughts, the less they're going to rile us up, the less they're going to engage with us. They'll still be there, but when you know who, that's just the bullies up the back, they're just unhelpful thoughts, the less they're going to impact upon you. Now, it's going to take a lot of practice, and as I was saying, they don't go away. We're not going to finish this 1 hour session that I got today and you're going to walk away and nothing's going to bother you ever again. But the less impact they're going to have over you, the easier things sort of are. And knowing them, getting to know this list back to front helps that, because it's hard to catastrophize for too long when you know you're catastrophizing, when you go, it's just milk being left out, and or I am just disqualifying the positive. I can see that there is actually a positive over here, or I am overgeneralizing just now. So they don't go away, but the less impact they have on you. And this leads to this idea of judgments. So Epictetus, that quote I said at the start from Epictetus, the philosopher who said, a person can't begin to learn what they think they already know. So he lived around 2,000 years ago. He was born into slavery. So he knew a thing or two about hardship. He didn't gain his freedom until much later on in life, when he gained his freedom then. And the stories that went around about the treatments that he endured were quite difficult. So when he finally gained his freedom, he started his school of philosophy. Now, despite this incredibly difficult life, one of the things that he noticed is what upsets people most of the time is not things themselves, but their judgments around those things, the way that we view those things. So even a little bit different from the unhelpful thinking styles, this is the viewpoint we take on things. What he's saying is that most of the time, things are just things and events are just events in a cause and effect world. They don't necessarily upset us. We can upset ourselves by the way we think about things, our views of those things. So let's use this as an example. I think it was, time getting away from me. I think it was about 8 years ago. I don't know, it doesn't matter. A long time ago, I was driving up to Darwin to manage one of those town planning companies. And I was about 100 kilometers out and I blew a tire. And I got out and I was furious. I was changing the tire, going, cursing the world, kicking the tire, putting on the spare little tire and driving the rest of the way to Darwin really, really slow. Just infuriated. In the start of 2017, I was driving from Brisbane to Toowoomba to deliver the Educator Wellbeing workshop, and I blew a tire again. But this time, as I was changing the tire, I was so much more calm. And I was reflecting on it, how last time I was losing my mind, where this time I was so much more calm about changing the tire. Therefore, it made me realize, actually, flat tires don't upset me. It's my judgments around flat tires that upset me. Because if it was flat tires themselves, I'd be upset all of the time. I'd be equally upset in that moment as I was last time, just as everybody would be as equally upset. I'd probably be upset right now because someone in the world's just got a flat tire. I'll be like, oh, flat tires, but no, it doesn't work that way. And then more recently, I blew a tire again, which made me learn two things. First off, don't drive with me because I seem to get a lot of flat tires. But secondly, since I was using that demonstration about getting flat tires all the time, I could choose in that situation not to get as upset by it. I go, well, I give this demonstration about flat tires and, my judgments of it. So I'm going to choose right now to not get upset by this situation. And there you go. Flat tires don't, I'm sure there's going to be times where they will, but let's admit that it's not always the situation. It's our judgments of the situation. It's like a late train. If you're dying to get home to watch Married at First Sight or Big Brother or The Block or something, I don't know. If you're dying to get home to watch your favorite television show and your train's late, you're going to be more upset than the teenager who doesn't even want to go home. Therefore, late trains don't upset us. We upset ourselves by our judgments of those things. And this leads on to the second part that Epictetus said, which is around relinquishing control. He also said that happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of just one principle. Some things are in your control and some things are not. And if we want peace, we should only really be concerning ourselves in life with the things that are actually under our control. So what is under our control? What are some of the things that we can control?
We can control our own reaction.
Yep.
And our own thoughts.
Thoughts, yeah. To an extent, we still have unhelpful thoughts, but they're our thoughts. And yeah. Essentially, two things basically at the end of the day. We can control our thoughts and our actions. Essentially, we can control ourselves in those situations. What we can't control is what other people think, what other people think of us, how other people behave, how rude other people are, how well our peers do their job, how other people's other people's habits, other people's successes, because even that can get to us. Everything else is outside of our control. We still do our best towards these things, but we must realize that our happiness, we can't rely our happiness on things outside of our control. So we still do our best towards these things, but we don't rely our happiness on these things, or our contentment or lack of want, or however you want to describe that word. So letting go of the things outside of your control, that's what offers us that sense of peace. See, nothing bad happens if you let go of the stuff that is outside of your control. It's already outside of your control. Worrying about it wasn't changing a thing. It was just making you feel really, really bad. Often we get this sense of guilt if we let go of things that are outside of our control. But worrying about those things wasn't changing it at all. It's like carrying a big, heavy bag of bricks of guilt, of worry. It's fine to take that bag of bricks off if that's outside of your control, right? We often worry about things because worrying is actually addictive. Every single time you worry about something, your brain gives you a little bit of a reward saying, there you go, you did something about it, you worried about it. But usually we didn't do anything at all. We just made ourselves feel really, really bad. We've got to remember that worrying is actually there for a reason. It's actually there to propel you to do the opposite of that thing, saying, hey, this needs attention right now, do something towards this thing. But often we sort of forget that part and just start to feel really bad about it. Same as most emotions that we describe as negative, loneliness. It's there actually to propel you to be around other people, hunger, to, all those sorts of pain, even to pay attention to whatever could be wrong right now. So all those so-called negative emotions are usually there to propel you to do the opposite thing. We often sort of forget that and don't do that next step. So it's not about being passive and giving up, going, it's outside of my control, I'm not even going to worry about that. It's more about acceptance. It's about taking all that energy and time and energy that we used to spend just wasting, just feeling really, really bad, not doing anything, and transferring that into what we can do and doing that to the best of our abilities. And I like, as J.K. Rowling says, worrying doesn't change a thing. Worrying just means that you suffer twice. And I think that's quite clever, and I like to steal that. In the Educator Wellbeing workshops and stuff like that, we've usually got a lot more time to open those things up, and we give examples of each of those points that we went through. But has anyone got questions on that before we move into this next part? Is there any lingering questions of that sort of section? No? Great. So it's all making clear sense. Great. Another great one I've read is don't invest in energy in what can. Yeah, that's right, Jody. Jody just taught, can everyone see the chat box as well? Yeah, that's great, Jody. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay. Work-life balance. Who here has achieved work-life balance? Who's got that sorted? Who's got your work life and your home life? Jody's got it. Yeah? No. Oh.
I'll say not currently right this second, because I've been now on my computer for 20 hours straight because I'm based in the United States and I'm working across 2 time zones. But normally I do have really good work-life balance. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. And we do. I mean, don't we? We all aim for this work-life balance, don't we? So this is what I've been trying to do my entire life, is how do I achieve this work-life balance? We started to put our thinking around this, Sandy and I and the team at Phoenix Support. We're like, how do we get this work-life balance? We've got our own company, we've got our employees. How do we achieve this work-life balance? And then the more we thought on about it, we thought, if we try too hard to achieve work-life balance, it almost creates a duality of the self. Like, you got a work life, you got a home life. All of a sudden, you're supposed to be 2 different people in 2 different locations. So the more we thought about it, we thought, well, let's, instead of doing work-life balance, let's look at life needs balance. Because really, we think that life is just one big messy hole. Who you are at home and who you are at work are essentially the same person. What's expected of you is going to be different at different locations, but you're still that same person. So life is just essentially life. So instead of work-life balance, we propose what we call life needs balance, which of course is the name of this presentation. And what is life needs balance? Dun, 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 the exciting moment, building the suspense. And life needs balance is, not going to tell you just yet. Oh, just like I don't know. It's harder to do on the screen, but yeah. Okay. Abraham Maslow. Before we get to life needs balance, who's heard of Abraham Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Who's seen this before? Okay, great. See, there's even thumbs up in here. Great. For those of you who haven't seen Maslow, I'll just give you a 2-second rundown. Abraham Maslow came up with this idea in the late 40s that we have basic human life needs, and that those life needs are formed in a bit of a hierarchy. And at the bottom, you got your physiological needs, food, air, water, that sort of stuff. Only once you got those needs met, can you meet up to your next lot of needs, your safety needs. And only once those needs are met, can you climb up further to the hierarchy to your love and belonging needs. Essentially, you've got to have your base needs met before you move up the hierarchy to your next lot of needs, all the way up to self-actualization. Maslow he not went back on it, but a little bit later on, he was sort of saying, you know, there's a bit more flexibility in that, and you can bounce around a little bit, but, you know, essentially you still got to have your base needs met first. By that time, his model was so famous that people probably stopped listening to him and just took on his model on board, which is still absolutely fantastic. So it guides a lot of the psychology that's still around today. And it seems pretty spot on when you look at people's behaviors, that the behaviors they're choosing to meet these different basic human life needs. There's been instances, however, where there's been people who have been up the top here, self-actualizing, even though their base needs weren't being met first. So how do we sort of explain those situations? Like people like Epictetus the slave, he was up there self-actualizing, but he certainly wasn't getting love and belonging, and sometimes his safety was definitely at risk, and even his physiological stuff when you read about some of the stuff that happened to him. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, finding hope in a place of hopelessness, still up there self-actualizing, even though his base needs weren't getting met first. Nelson Mandela, locked in a prison for 27 years, up there self-actualizing, even though his other needs weren't being met. So how do these sort of fit within this, you know, this kind of hierarchy? It sort of not challenges a little bit, but there's a bit of an anomaly in there, right? So a little bit later on, another theorist come along called Dr. William Glasser. And what he says is, yeah, I think that people have basic human life needs. I think every single person has basic human life needs. But he says, I don't think they're a hierarchy like Maslow said. I think they're a needs profile. He says, I think that every single one of us has a need for love and belonging. We all have a need for power, recognition, and control. We all have a need for fun and learning. We all have a need for survival, which would have been the same as Maslow's physiological needs. And we all have a need for freedom, autonomy, and choice. What he says, though, is we all have different size needs, where one person might have a big need for love and belonging. Someone else might only have a small need for love and belonging. Where someone might have a ginormous need for power, recognition, and control, like the President of the United States. Or someone else might only have a medium-sized need for power, recognition, and control, you know? So what he's saying is we all have these different basic human life needs that affect our different behaviors. Because what he says is every behavior we do is to meet one of those needs. He says from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we're just a string of behaviors. And every behavior we choose, because he thinks it's choice theory, that's a choice, whether we're conscious of it or not, is to meet one of these different basic human life needs. Now, my wife, Sandy Phoenix, about 8 years ago, was trying to explain choice theory to some educators. She works with children's behavior, so she was trying to explain what is the function behind the behavior? Why do you think the child is choosing that certain behavior? Because if you just get rid of if you just try to work on the behavior, a different behavior is going to spring up instead because there's a function behind that behavior. And she was trying to explain choice theory, and the educator wasn't quite understanding at the moment, but she happened to have a cup in front of her. So she goes, imagine this cup is this child's need for connection. I can't remember, I don't know the situation was about, but let's use this scenario. Let's say that this cup is this need for connection. This is their connection cup. If this cup has this much emptiness in it, that child is still going to choose cup filling behaviors to get that need met, right? So this is where the first rendition of the Phoenix cups were born, was she started talking about those basic human life needs in different cups. So each cup represents a different basic human life needs. So the Phoenix cups are the mastery cup, the safety cup, the freedom cup, the connection cup, and the fun cup. Now, right now, you can automatically tell they've got slightly different names to what William Glasser was talking about with basic human life needs. There's a reason for that, because that we've sort of evolved it over that time. We've added a whole lot more psychology that's happened since then. Sandy's own work with education and care, work we've done with Dr. Louise Porter. This bookshelf of philosophy has kind of gone into that theory as well. So it's evolved a fair bit since then. So you'll notice those names are a little bit different, and I'll open that up a little bit more. But essentially, each cup represents a different basic human life need. And we all have different size cups, which make up our unique Phoenix Cups profile. So where one person might have a big safety cup, someone else might only have a small safety cup, and so forth. And every behavior we choose is to fill one or more of those cups. So let's look at those cups in a little bit more detail now. So I'll just move that across. So we all have a fun cup. We all have a mastery cup. We all have a freedom cup. We all have a safety cup, and we all have a connection cup. The difference is we have different size cups, and these cups represent our basic human life needs. What goes into each cup are different behavioral choices. And these choices are not only our physical behaviors, but even our thoughts, because thoughts can also fill and empty our cups, as we can see with our unhelpful thoughts, and we'll explain that a little bit more. But each cup, as you can tell, also, which is again a little bit different from Glasser, is we think that every single basic human life need actually has an outcome behind it. So for instance, the outcome of a fun cup, the full fun cup, the need trying to be met, is outcome is a need for joy. The outcome of a full mastery cup is self-confidence. The outcome of a full freedom cup is a sense of autonomy. The outcome of a full safety cup is a sense of security. And the outcome of a full connection cup is a sense of self-worth. Now, the difference again between choice theory is, and choice theory and Maslow talked about a physiological need. With the safety cup, we've got physiological and psychological need in there as well, because you can have your physiological stuff that needs in there, food, air, water, that sort of stuff. But you can also have your psychological needs for safety and security. Some people need higher levels of predictability and stability and that sort of stuff to keep their safety and security needs met. Is that changing? Let's go. So what happens is our cups are static. They're genetic. When we're born with these different sort of levels of different basic human life needs that stick with us our whole entire lives. What changes, however, are the different levels of our cups. They constantly fluctuate how full or empty those cups are and our behavioral choices. So as we get older, we develop this thing which we call the skill to fill, and we get more skilled at getting our needs met. So when Sandy's doing her work with children's behavior, they're choosing the quickest, behavior possible to get their needs met, which isn't always as considerate and cooperative as we are as adults. Well, most of us as adults, I know some adults who still don't have a great skill to fill, but we get a little bit better at choosing our skills. So we had a friend who said to us, I don't think this is correct. I think that my connection cup has actually gotten smaller, because when I was younger, I needed connection from everybody. I needed the love and whatnot from everybody. But what we've realized is when she was younger, she probably had a lot less in her connection cup. So she was constantly trying to fill it with love and connection from other people. But as she's gotten older, she's learned a lot more self-love and things like that. And she's got a family unit and stuff like that. So she's able to keep her connection cup a whole lot full. So it doesn't feel like that need is there as much. It's more because that cup is actually full at the moment. So the bigger the cup, the more likely you're going to see that need a bit more often, because there's a bit more need required in there, which we call the will to fill. So these are our different needs profiles. So these are my cups, and that's my wife Sandy's cup. So as you can see, I've got a bigger freedom cup than Sandy. So one of my big needs is freedom. I like to get out and explore. I like to go. Previously, I used to go on holidays to countries and purposely try to get myself lost and explore and get on my motorbike and just get lost as well and just do those sorts of things. Creativity fills my freedom cup as well. I just like to sit in my room and write and all that sort of stuff. Where my wife Sandy has a big mastery cup. She likes things in order. This is why she's the business. She runs the business, and I try to do all the fun stuff. But she likes to put things in order. And she always at school, she always made sure that she had her work up to date and loved doing homework and things like that. So we could see though where if we didn't know each other's basic human life needs, we could start to conflict a little bit, because you'd think someone with a big mastery cup and someone with a big freedom cup might conflict. But because we understand each other's basic human life needs, we can understand why we choose those different behavioral choices and why we have those specific needs. You can even see it Sandy and I can see it in staff meetings. We often go and do our PD workshops and staff meetings and stuff like that. We can see people's cups as we walk in. It's almost like they're carrying a tray of cups behind them. You can tell the big fun cups, because they're the ones whistling and bursting into the room with big bottles of wine and stuff like that at staff meetings. You could tell people's big need for fun. You could tell the big safety cups, they're the ones who are sitting by the catering and they taste test the catering all the night. And you have to finish on time for the safety cups, because they need 8 hours of sleep a night. If they don't get 8 hours of sleep, they're really hard to work with the next day. So they've got to get to bed on time. And they often take naps on weekends and stuff like that. We're up to the big connection cups. They come in and they hug everybody. They introduce themselves to you personally, and you can, making sure that everybody's okay. So they go around and see everybody. And the big mastery cup is usually the one who's organized the staff meeting, and she's the one separating the fun cup, saying, you fun cup sit there, you other fun cup sit over there. Don't make that secret fun cup language. We don't often see the big freedom cups at the staff meetings. They're usually off in Bali or somewhere like that, or planning trips and whatnot. So you can start to see people's people's cups by their behavioral choices. So what has this got to do with well-being? When a person has full cups, they feel good and have a strong sense of fulfillment. But when cups are emptying, when we can feel our cups emptying, that's when we feel unease, we feel an emptiness inside of us, and we are driven to choose behaviors that are going to fill those cups. So it's like an internal drive, and I'll talk about that soon. Man, time is flying along. Okay. Now on our, I think it's on our website and on our Facebook page, we have these different lists of PDFs and resources available, which give you a little bit more information about the cups and general top traits. It's normal for people to have, some people can have all similar size cups. Some people can have 2 dominant cups and small cups, so we all have different size cups. But if you want to know more about the individual cups and whatnot, we do have these resources available. So feel free to email me if you can't find them, and I'll get them together for you. But we've got these, and they just tell us top traits that you generally find in people who have them. And not everybody's going to be the same. So I've got a dominant freedom cup. My stepdaughter also has a dominant freedom cup, but we fill them completely differently. Where I like to get out and go on holidays and explore and travel new lands, she's happy to just lock herself away with her music and paint all day. So we both have a dominant freedom cup, but our traits are a little bit different, but they're still freedom cup filling behaviors. So on and so forth. So what we got to work out next is, what is our cups profile? What we need to know is, what are our own personal cups, so we can come up with these cup filling plans so we can achieve some well-being. What we've provided is, over time, we've finally created this Phoenix Cups quiz. So at the bottom, there's a web address. It's only 30 questions, so it's not an in-depth quiz. It's not one of those ones like the Myers-Briggs that take you half of your life and you have to answer 3,000 questions. This is a 30-question quiz. Most people, though, they finish the 30 questions, it spits out what it could look like in terms of your cups. Most people go, wow, that is me dead on. You've just completely, sourced it. Where some people look at it and go, that kind of looks like me, but it's not quite right. So it's only really there as a guide. So when you do the quiz a little bit later, try think of your life as a whole. Don't just try answer it how you feel in the moment. Because what could be happening is, if one of those cups is a little bit empty, what you're going to do in that moment is probably choose that answer, because you're trying to choose a behavior that would probably fill that cup up in the moment. And another thing to do is, once you've got your quiz results, ask them, show the results to those who you know best, those who know you the best, because often the way we see ourselves might even be a little bit different to how other people see us. So we go, oh, I'm not a big freedom cup. And then someone else goes, really? You sure? And then, so sometimes other people close to us know those as well. And even if they don't think it's correct, just help work out, just use the quiz as a bit of a guide to work out what you think your cups are, what the size of your different cups are. Okay. Now, Sandy and I published this book at the end of last year. So it's the Phoenix Cups book. So what I've just given you sort of the shotgun so far version of the Phoenix Cups. We wrote it into a book, but we wrote it into a novel, so that way it's not another boring textbook. So we've got these characters who uncover the cups, and then they discuss the cups and all that sort of stuff. So it filled my freedom cup to even write it as well, because I like philosophy, I like creative writing. So I turned it into a story. Great, just looking at these comments. So we've turned it into a bit of a story. Now, it was through writing the story, though, that we were able to even develop it a little bit further. And one of the things that came out while writing this book was a new concept, which we call the will to fill. So based around, at the time I was researching a lot of Arthur Schopenhauer and Friedrich Nietzsche and their ideas of different will. Schopenhauer said the will to the will to life, which he talked about, this unconscious internal driver within us that we always choose life-affirming decisions, survive and reproduce, that sort of stuff. Later on, it inspired Charles Darwin. Friedrich Nietzsche said, he was a big fan of Schopenhauer, he came along a little bit later, said, no, I don't think that's true. I think we all have a need to a will to power. We all choose life-affirming decisions, otherwise why would we get anywhere, and so forth. And I was researching these two philosophers when writing this book that I came up with the idea of the will to fill. So essentially, the will to fill is, there's an unconscious will behind each cup that is motivating us to fill that cup when it's emptying. So it's an unconscious internal driver that is forcing us to choose those cup filling behaviors to fill that cup. A good way of thinking about it is essentially the will to fill is the empty part of the cup that is driving us to get that need met to fill up the remainder of that cup. Now, our dominant cups, they require more to fill. So we usually see these behaviors more often because they're the bigger cup. They usually generally have a greater will to fill. So you usually see those behaviors more often. You see people's dominant cups more often. However, there's an anomaly to that. Whichever cups are requiring filling at that moment, because even our smallest cups, they even require filling, even though it might just take less to fill, that's where the will to fill will arrive first and motivate us to fill that even over some of our more dominant cups. So one of my smaller cups is mastery. That's one of my smaller cups. But if that cup is completely empty, I'm going to abandon my freedom cup to get that will to mastery aside, because that need is more pressing in me right now. Now, it's not necessarily a negative thing to think about that will to fill, that negative part, because you can still honor that and be grateful for that part, because now you've got an opportunity to choose some cup filling behaviors. So leading up from that, so I thought I was pretty clever coming up with this idea of the will to fill, thinking that there wasn't just one or two wills like Schopenhauer and whatnot. But then my wife had the one and up me and beat me again, and she came up with this idea of the skill to fill. So what she says is, where the will to fill is that unconscious driver, she says the skill to fill is knowing the skills to develop a set of behavioral choices that will reliably ensure that our needs are met. It is the process of active cup filling which requires our skill. So where the will to fill drives us to get that need met, it's having the skill to fill that creates that fulfillment in us. So we never actually lack the will to fill. That will to fill will always be inside of us. Sometimes we just lack the skill to fill. So what we've got to constantly work on is our skills in getting our needs met. Wow, that time is flying. So what we've got to consciously learn to do is fill our cups, or plan how to get our cups filled to achieve a momentarily state of fulfillment and not just this lack of suffering. So let me explain this idea of a lack of suffering. I know I'm going through this stuff really fast and could be deep concepts, but time permits. So imagine you finished work, you're on your way home and you're really, really hungry, right? So you jump into McDonald's and grab something to eat. What you think is fulfillment, because you've fulfilled that safety cup, is actually just a lack of suffering. You've just fulfilled it, right? So it's not there anymore. But if you were to go home and have if you had already planned before you went to work that day that you got a nice meal set for you at home, or you're going to go out to dinner or something like that, that's going to fill your safety cup far more than this other, ad hoc behavior, because you put intention behind it, right? So they're both filling the safety cup, but one of them is more fulfillment because it's used skill behind it, right? So some of the ways we can do that is increasing our skill is being more intentional about our world. So instead of just ad hoc behavior, just constantly trying to fill all our needs, let's be intentional, coming up with cup filling plans of how we can get our needs met. And also being grateful. Gratitude is one of those great intentionality things, which is really good. What have we already got in our lives? What is already in our cups that we can be grateful for? That helps bind holes in cups and keeps them fuller for longer. When you're grateful for what's already in your cup, it also gives you a good idea of what you can do to fill the rest of your cup. And the other big point we've got to do is being intentional about our thinking as well, being aware, being mindful of our thinking. Because if you've noticed, 4 of those cups are actually psychological. The only cup that was physiological is the safety cup, and that also has an aspect of psychology to it. And the way we think about things can so easily empty our cups. Thinking that nobody loves us is going to be completely connection cup emptying. But when you acknowledge that you got the love and love of your family and close friends and some workmates, that's going to be connection cup filling. So being intentional about our thoughts is going to be connection cup filling. So what is life needs balance? Choosing to fill your cups at home and in the workplace, right? So instead of work-life balance, having life needs balance, trying to get your cups full at home and at work. So that way you're not creating this duality of the self. The way you fill your cups in each location is going to be different. So you're going to need a different cup filling plan for each location, but the way you fill your cups in each location is going to be different. But we know, but you're still the same person then in each location. And we know what it's like to have a great day at work versus being at work a day where you're feeling kind of lousy. So more than likely, the day that you're feeling good at work, your cups are all sort of full. And the more you know your cups, the more you get to know this sort of stuff, the more you can tell which cup is kind of empty right now. You can go, oh, I feel like my fun cup's a little bit empty right now, or I feel like my mastery cup's a little bit empty or whatnot. And once you know which cups it are, you can enact your cup filling plans to get those needs met. So we need to consciously fill or plan how to fill our cups to achieve momentarily fulfillment. And I love this quote from Schopenhauer, so I'll chuck it in here. It's difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it's impossible to find it anywhere else. I think that's fantastic. And of course, shameless plug, but I'm proud of this book. It took me a year to write, but I absolutely love it. And we've had great feedback on it. So me holding it upside down, that was a bad plug. But if you want to check that out, have a look-see. We've also got online workshops as well. I've got the 6-week workplace wellbeing course, got the 28-day cup filling plan. Just jump on the quiz. And if not, we've just got free stuff anyway. And just follow us on Facebook and all those sorts of places. And I don't know what else I got to tell you. I've got like a million more slides I could go for, but I've got hours and hours of content. But this is the 1 hour version. And are we up to 2:27, Jennifer? Is this? Oh, I think you're... Sorry, Jennifer, I don't think we can hear. I think
we're just about finished. But Chris, could you tell us what your email address is so that we can send your email, send notes to you and ask for your stuff?
Yeah. I'm going to type it into here. So the website, of course, is www.phoenixcups.com.au. I'll put them on. Does everybody just want them in the chat box?
Yeah, that's great.
Follow us on Facebook, and we always try to give away as much as we can so that way people can, and just our usual channels. If you just search Phoenix Cups or Phoenix Support on Facebook, you'll be able to find us there. Feel free to connect with me on Facebook generally as well. Phil's my connection cup, you know. What about questions? Does anyone have any questions? No? Did I bore anybody?
Got us all thinking too much, Chris.
I've got a quick question.
Yep.
Where can we get the book? Can we only get it from your website, or can we order it on Amazon?
Currently, it's only from our website because we wanted complete control. So we knew going with a publisher, you'd start to lose a bit of that creative control. So right now we've got it to the strength that we want it. So now that it's starting to do quite well, then we want to approach publishers and say, hey, we don't want to change it. And this is, you know, we want to stick by our theory, which is ever evolving too. So the way the cups, each week we'll have a different conversation and go, hey, you can apply cups to this. So we talked about flow state the other day from Csikszentmihalyi and his stuff on engagement, saying that, you know, those flow activities that we get into and what children get into, we realize they're usually associated with our dominant cups. Whatever gives you flow is usually aligned with that person's dominant cup as well. So it's constantly evolving this stuff as well. So yeah, I'll also put in I think it's.
So I'm just thinking, Chris, that you probably don't ship to the US. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, we ship around the world. We've sold to US, Canada, Romania, UK, Japan. Yeah, it's gone all around the world. It's taking a little bit longer at the moment because the shipping through Corona is taking, like, some people say 3 weeks, some people say a month. So it does take that a little bit longer to get there.
Yeah, it's all good. No, that's good. I just thought I'd ask because I'm going to order a couple, so it's good. Thanks.
Oh, great. Fantastic. My shameless plug worked. I always feel so yuck talking about it. Like, yeah, any other questions? I feel like I recognize a few faces here, but I don't know if it's just because it's the past hour of looking at everybody.
Hey.
Oh, someone.
Oh.
Leonie has a copy. We have a copy out that I stole to read. That's great. Are you enjoying it? Have you had a look yet? Loved it. Ah, that's brilliant.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you very much. You've certainly given us a lot to think about. Me personally is work-life balance. Thank you for that. And how we think about ourselves. That's definitely something I'm going to take away from your session. So thank you very much for that.